Hey guys, so I just wanted to go over an interesting little section here from Match and Metamoris for Xande Ribeiro and Dean Lister. They squared off, and Xande had a great pass going here. He had double underhooks, and then he's going to transition this into a head grab pass. So there's kind of an interesting detail with passing, right? So if you think about something like an X pass or a double under pass, there's a few components that would constitute whether you actually get around the legs. One is the motion that you make in circling around the legs, right? So for a double under pass, you'd be going under the legs initially and then circling around in order to get closer to side control. And then for an X pass, you would be slightly entangled in the legs, and then you would whip your leg around and to get around the legs to either the right or left side. So in both scenarios, you're not cutting straight through the legs like in a knee pass or in a linear knee cut, but instead whipping around the side eventually to get your pass. So for both of those situations, because there is this kind of rotation that's involved in rotating around the guard, getting around the legs, there is a real importance on the relative angle between your opponent's head and your hips. So if your hips can make it to your opponent's head, you're basically in north-south. The only factor that would inhibit that is if they have some kind of strong inversion that's going on, in which your hips are close to their head, but the legs are still really entangled in the equation. So as long as you get two things, your hips next to their head and leg clearance, then you're going to be passed, right? So back to the two things that we need for passing, one is that your hips need to be closer to the head, and two is that it's mostly about the relative angle. So even if your hips are rotating quickly, if your opponent's head is rotating away from you faster than your hips are rotating towards their head, then you're actually losing ground in the guard passing game. So even if your hips are making progress, it's really not about the absolute progress that they're making, it's about the relative progress. So we take a look at this situation here. Xande is going to use the head grab in order to stymie the rotation of Dean Lister's head away from him, so that the relative hip position that he has with respect to Dean Lister's head can be improved. So we'll take a look at that as we come through here. We got good hip pressure. He's going to start rotating. He's going to grab a hold of the head right there. You can see this grip. Right now it's kind of on the shoulder, but it'll be transferred to the head. And he's going to use that grip to pull himself, right? And you can see that Dean's making a concerted effort to stiff arm here. He wants a blockade because he wants his head far away from the hips, right? When the hips converge to the head, that's a pass as long as the legs are not entwined. But in this situation, we see Dean Lister's legs are way over here, and then another one's not visible, it's far over there. Plus, Dean Lister's inverted guard is not his best game, or he's a much bigger individual, so he'd much rather be playing a non-inverted game here. And so he creates this post, this barrier right here with his hand, and he's also going to try to take his head as far away as possible, hopefully getting this leg off of the shoulder and into the crook of the elbow, because if the leg converges into the crook of the elbow, then what we'll have here is the ability for him to weave the foot underneath the hip, and that's going to create a new form of guard for him. So we'll take a look at how this progresses. He starts coming around, and then he's going to hit, and then from here Dean kind of starts going a little bit belly down, and Xande starts looking kind of towards maybe a back take or a mount sequence, or to entangle the legs further, but he no longer needs that head grip now because his hips got much closer to the head, so much so that Dean decided to play the opposite game, actually bring his head in, right? He was going that way initially, and then he reverted to deciding to go towards the hips, because now he might be looking to come up on a single, he might be looking to turtle, he might be looking to turtle then Granby, who knows, but the running away strategy had already failed because of that head grip from Xande. And so now we're going to go back to kind of the hip placement. Now Xande switches to a cross face and really try to stabilize side control as we continue this pass. Again, Dean's kind of looking for a single leg right here, and Xande does a beautiful mount right here, and then he's going to start looking for this Kimura to start trying to get a finish. So just an interesting detail on what passing is about, and I think that kind of framing it in the idea of hip convergence towards your opponent's head, as well as that the relative distance, is kind of an interesting way of looking at it, and that really exemplifies why a head grip might be a really good option.